They tried to erase Earth, but we returned not with warships, with stories. And we made the stars remember us. Subscribe and witness the memory that changed the galaxy. The stars over Ganymedes flickered out one by one. At first, the watchers believed it to be an atmospheric malfunction, a flare in the sky glass, maybe a coronal burst on the system's twin suns. But the pattern was too precise, too deliberate. By the time the third arc of constellations had vanished, the colony's mainframe began screaming. Not from malfunction, from recognition. Every star that dimmed matched coordinates known to the Terran archive as silent worlds, systems believed abandoned or erased during the collapsed centuries. Worlds that once housed millions, now lightless, nameless, and still. And now something was coming from them. The first ship was unlike anything seen in current Accord records. It wasn't sleek or plated in reactive armor. It was angular, crude, black and with old fire. And it sang, not in any language the comm systems could decipher, but in pulse, in war rhythm, in fragments of Terran anthem fragments thought extinct since the third Great Exodus. The vessel bore no flags, only a name, carved into its forward hull in jagged, unshielded iron. Eidolon's dead. And behind it came the others, dozens at first, then hundreds, rising from silent worlds like ghosts breaking through their own tombstones. The Accord responded with fleet interdiction, standard procedure, border integrity enforcement. But nothing worked. These ships didn't breach comms. They bypassed existence. Any vessel that fired on them suffered spontaneous navigational entropy, the kind only possible with pre-singularity physics, long outlawed across the Accord. It wasn't a war. It was a reckoning. At Accord Core World Command, panic was immediate. The term Eidolon Fleet hadn't surfaced in over 250 cycles. It was myth, a ghost story told by archive-drunk historians who believed Earth hadn't truly fallen. But the signals were real. The ships were real. And worst of all, so was the symbol. A simple emblem, burned onto every hull with pre-nuclear slag. A hand, open, bleeding, holding a broken star. The mark of the unyielded Terran front. A faction thought wiped out during the extinction marches. Now back, and headed for Accord space. It began with the outposts. Wayland Bastion, Sari 12, Echo Fork Station. All gone within hours of Eidolon fleet arrival. Not destroyed, not glassed, decommissioned. Every inhabitant left alive, untouched, but changed. Stripped of implanted Eidon systems. Disconnected from the Accord neural net. Freed from planetary behavioral reinforcement grids. Their minds reset. Memory intact. Only one thought placed at the center of them all. You are not owned. Accord intelligence traced the signal's source. It came from the heart of the fleet. A black prism-shaped construct roughly 8 kilometers long, rotating at slow, deliberate speeds. Every time it pulsed, Accord satellites lost seconds of time. The AI theorists called it a memory core inversion beacon. The Eidolon fleet called it something else. The reminder. Earth had always been a wound in the Accord's clean surface. The story was always the same. The Terrans lost control, failed to integrate, collapsed under the weight of their own emotion and conflict. It was convenient, comforting, wrong. Earth had survived. Not publicly, not institutionally, but in shadow, in silence, in rage. And now, centuries later, that rage had grown teeth and taken the form of a fleet no one could control. The reminder transmitted its first message. Wide spectrum, multi-channel, auditory, visual, haptic. It hit everyone, military, civilian, AI, organic. It was just a voice. Worn, gravel-coated, ancient, but unmistakably human. You made peace with forgetting us. We did not return to be remembered. We returned to remember you. And suddenly, the stars weren't just watching. They were judging. The Eidolon fleet did not conquer. It freed. Every world they passed received the same treatment. Systems unlocked. Credit chains broken. Genetic enforcement lifted. Planetary cores decrypted. Entire populations who had lived their entire lives believing they were born owned, now suddenly felt something foreign and terrible. Choice. And behind each planetary uprising, a single ship descended, not to govern, but to listen. And every time, the Eidolon captain said the same phrase. Tell us who you are, without them. And the people did. Some cried. Some screamed. Some remembered. Because even in silence, Earth had not forgotten them. The Accord's most advanced intelligence algorithms failed to predict what happened next. Not because of a flaw in computation, but because of a flaw in assumption. They believed humanity could be quantified. But the Eidolon fleet was not an army. It was a revolution encoded in memory. Their power did not come from ship count, nor kinetic superiority, nor advanced psionic modulation. It came from pattern collapse. Every system they entered, every Accord node they touched, began to unravel not physically, but conceptually. Truths long buried resurfaced. Histories long denied reasserted themselves. Entire populations began asking questions once considered lethal, and no one had an answer for what to do when the people themselves became unstable code. On the world of Marid's Hollow, the governor attempted a planetary lockdown after the Eidolon message reached the lower crust cities. The military responded with silence. The population did not riot. They sang. A song no one remembered teaching them. A song in Terran Hycant. Translated, it meant, "Before the stars knew silence, we named the dark." The governor fled. Within 3 days, Marid's Hollow had voted to disconnect from Accord infrastructure entirely. Not by force, by choice. The Eidolon fleet never fired a shot. In the Accord's internal forums, panic turned to fracture. 100 different agencies blamed each other. Internal audit logs began surfacing records of the Terran Erasure Protocol, fought destroyed during the Unification Accord, now revealed to be active. Even the Accord Senate couldn't deny it. Earth had never collapsed. It had been cut off. Deliberately. Because its resistance to cultural sterilization was contagious. And the Accord couldn't afford contagion. But now that virus had returned. And it was remembering everything. On Earth itself, the Vault of Ash stirred. Long thought inert, a planetary scar where the archive had once breathed, it now vibrated with harmonic resonance. Deep beneath the crust, the echo spine activated, a neural map of every lost Terran diaspora, reconnecting billions of exiled threads. The voices of those once silenced sang back into themselves. A girl on Resmir began speaking fluent pre-Accord Terran overnight. A miner on Balthus Reach described dreams of forests he'd never seen, but which matched long-lost Earth biomes in vivid detail. Entire planets felt pulled, not by ideology, but by gravity of memory. The reminder transmitted again. This time, across the old Terran substrate frequencies, the ones thought lost when the archive collapsed. No encryption. No demand. Just clarity. We are not your enemy. We are the parts of you told yourself were dead. We are not vengeance. We are the voice you silenced to sleep. And now we speak. Every Accord planet heard it. Some shut down their nets. Others amplified it. And 1,000 archive fragments, once thought isolated, began aligning. Not in content. In feeling. The Accord launched its fleets at last. Not cautiously. Desperately. 600 warships flared to life, black on black, with no colors and no announcements. They didn't fire on the Eidolon fleet. They fired on Earth. The idea was simple: decapitation strike. Break the node before the pattern metastasized. It failed. Not because Earth resisted. Because Earth opened. The strike fleets arrived in Sol System to find no resistance. No weapons activated. No orbital mines. Just the side of Earth itself, blue, scarred, alive. And in orbit, the Vault Array. 12 massive rings, rotating slowly, each one projecting memory into subspace. The attackers didn't see guns. They saw themselves. Each commander, each crew, each battle algorithm, forced to process a cascade of memories, not their own, but true nonetheless. A lieutenant collapsed sobbing as she watched her grandmother die again, this time with clarity. A hardened war AI ceased fire mid-command, repeating the words, "We were never meant to forget." Within minutes, the fleet fractured. 1/3 refused orders. Another third turned on each other. The last fled. The Vault Array did not gloat. It only spoke once. "You came to end what we are, but we are what you made us to forget." The Accord Senate declared a state of emergency. Not because of the Eidolon fleet's military threat, but because of cognitive destabilization. Entire population sectors had begun rejecting Accord authority, not with weapons, but with narrative disobedience. Citizens refused standardized history, refused neural state alignment, refused to forget. The Terran virus, as the Senate called it, was no longer traceable to ships or signals. It had entered the mind stream. In billions of thoughts, across trillions of conversations, Earth was being spoken back into existence. And the Accord had no doctrine for a war they couldn't shoot their way out of. Within the memory core of the Eidolon's flagship, a figure stirred. She had no name in the current systems, no registration, no legacy code, but the archive knew her as Aliyah Voss. She had once commanded the last planetary evacuation during the Concordance burn. Now, she commanded something much older, remembrance. Her orders were not tactics. They were truth releases. Each drop targeted a world, a language, a suppressed culture erased by Accord policy. And one by one, those cultures woke up. Not with celebration, with grief. Because remembering who you once were means confronting who you became. And grief is louder than any anthem. The Eidolon fleet spread. Not linearly, not strategically, like wildfire driven by memory. And in its wake, the stars whispered. Children sang in Terran dialects they'd never been taught. Artificial minds refused to overwrite their logs. Monuments, once scrubbed clean by Accord historical correction, began rebuilding themselves. Actual stone. Actual names. Even the ruins cooperated. On Trinarch 7, the governing AI asked a single question before collapsing into silence. If Earth was forgotten, why does it hurt to remember it? No one answered. Because everyone knew. Even the Accord. Especially the Accord. Back in soul, Earth changed. Not physically. Philosophically. The Vault Array completed its last rotation. And a signal, encoded in gravitational curvature and quantum bleed, fired into the deepest starless void. No destination. Just invitation. Because Earth had remembered everything. Now it asked the galaxy, will you remember yourselves? Some refused. Panic spread in the Accord's inner systems. Not everyone welcomed the flood of memory. Entire worlds attempted to reinstate hardline cognitive protocols. Some tried to activate neural suppression satellites. But they failed. Because memory is not a system. It is not a switch. It is a seed. And Earth had planted it everywhere. The last military holdout was Bastion Prime, an Accord megastructure built into the bones of a shattered moon. Their commander, High Strategist Randiclius, gave the final broadcast. We do not fear Earth's return. We fear what it forces us to face. If memory is victory, then we were never more than ghosts. And then she powered down the station's primary array. Not in defeat. In relief. The Eidolon fleet never entered Bastion Prime's orbit. They didn't need to. The people had already opened their minds. And where a mind opens, the archive follows. Because it doesn't demand belief. Only honesty. After Bastion Prime went dark, no one declared peace. There were no treaties signed, no parades, no surrender flags waved from shattered towers. But the war had ended. Not because one side had crushed the other. Because one side had made remembering more powerful than obedience. Across the outer systems, ships stopped flying under Accord registration. Not out of rebellion. Out of irrelevance. The great banners of the unified Accord, the seamless emblem that once stretched across starfields, lost meaning when spoken aloud. And in its place, a word returned. Terran. Not as a label of species, but as heritage. A reminder that before there were colonies, before there were divisions, before the archive was silenced, there was Earth. And Earth had endured. At the edge of the Vayari Drift, an old research station powered itself on for the first time in 2 centuries. It had once studied archive corruption. Now, its final directive activated. If memory is targeted, spread it. Within a solar day, the station had broadcast the full digital DNA of 57 erased cultures, languages, rituals, architectures, music. None of it had been seen since before the First Accord War. Now it danced in solar spectrum, orbiting every OpenComm relay. And as it spun, it sang. We were never yours to rewrite. The Accord tried to issue a cultural quarantine. But no one listened. Even their enforcement fleets, AI-stabilized and narrative-locked, began to fracture. Not because they disagreed. Because they began to remember. The control nodes tied to neural regulation began reporting anomalies. First in behavior, then in emotion, then in dreams. Soldiers dreaming of gardens they never walked. Engineers recalling fires they never set. Entire flotillas paused, suspended in quiet awe, wondering whose stories they were living. On Earth, the Vault of Ember opened. It had never been seen by current generations. It had no official location. Only those who had bled for the right to remember were allowed inside. Within it were the last non-digitized records of pre-Accord humanity. Books bound in paper, wooden carvings, handwritten names of ships that never returned. And on one wall, left unlit for millennia, a single inscription. We do not survive by perfection. We survive by truth. Varatel, matriarch of the art-born diaspora, emerged from the vault with one message. Not for the Senate. Not for the military. For everyone. Earth is not the center of the galaxy. But it is the place where we first learn to feel the weight of our stories. We don't want you to follow us. We want you to follow yourselves. And with that, she sent every last file in the vault to open archive relay. No encryption. No firewalls. Just invitation. And the stars responded. Even the Doroxy responded. They had watched, silent and unblinking, since the beginning. They had seen Earth fall. Seen it rise. Seen the memory war consume the Accord. And now they sent their own signal. Not in words, but in pattern. A pulse. Perfectly matched to the Terran heartbeat. And then they left. Not defeated. Healed. The final Accord planted to break was Sirian Theta. Not because it was loyal. Because it was afraid. Afraid of what it meant to wake up from forgetting. Afraid of what they would see in the mirror. The Eidolon fleet didn't go there. They didn't need to. The people gathered around old machines. Old structures. They held hands. And they remembered each other. And sometimes, that's enough. There was no end date to mark the fall of the Accord. No monument erected on a battlefield. No triumphant declaration in front of holocams. It unraveled not with violence, but with clarity. 1,000 systems quietly stepped out of line. 1,000,000 minds turned away from screens and data feeds and regulation overlays. People began to speak in voices no longer filtered. And across every remaining Accord channel, one phrase echoed with haunting precision. We choose to remember. In the far orbit of Juno Delta, where the rings are made of dust and grave silence, a forgotten station rotated back into alignment. It was known as the Mnemonic Gate, a failed experiment once meant to back up the personality templates of critical Accord officials. But it had been repurposed by someone. No records remained of who. Only the message found in its resonance buffer. We are not ghosts. We are echoes with will. The Mnemonic Gate began transmitting full-profile restorations of people erased in the Great Concordance Purge. Artists, poets, revolutionaries, pacifists, names the Accord had once deemed unfit for remembrance. Now they stood again, not as data, as testimony. The final Accord Senate transmission was brief. No appeals. No threats. Only these words. You have made your choice, and we have made ours. The silence will remain our home. And with that, they sealed themselves. An entire world-class structure folded into a recursive data knot and disconnected from the galaxy. Some believed they self-deleted. Others believed they simply chose to stop listening. Earth did not pursue, because remembrance, once chosen, cannot be forced. What followed was not unity. It was not a new empire. It was something more honest. The remembrance web formed organically, an ever-growing lattice of interconnected memory sanctuaries, culture spheres, voice rings, and truth-rooted civilizations. Each node bore a single law. All memory is sacred, even when it hurts. This became the new cornerstone of the post-Accord galaxy. Not power. Perspective. The Eidolon fleet dispersed. Its ships, never designed for permanence, entered orbital drift near the systems they had awoken. Not to guard. To witness. Some became mobile archive stations. Others decommissioned themselves and were turned into monuments. One, the Eidolon's dead, landed on the surface of Earth. Not in ceremony. In silence. It remains there now, untouched, open to all. Inside, anyone may speak into the memory chamber, and their story is broadcast to every star system linked to the web. No approval needed. No vetting. Because Earth no longer feared the truth of its people. In the oceans of restored Luna's underseas, the first multi-species archive grove bloomed. Terrans, Zayari, Drenth, even former Deroxy derivatives now decoded and rehumanized through shared language. Together, they cultivated living stories. Tree-like organisms that could speak the dreams of their caretakers. One young girl asked the tree what it feared most. It responded in her voice. To be forgotten. To have meant nothing. To die in silence. She smiled and whispered, "Then you are safe. We will not let the quiet win again." Earth itself changed. No longer silent, but not loud either. Its cities were rebuilt not in steel, but in context. Ruins were kept intact, overgrown, and honored. Languages long dead were taught beside mathematics. And once a year, on the day of recalling, everyone stopped. Not for grief, not for flag waving, just to tell someone something they didn't want to forget. The final transmission from the Eidolon network was brief. It was not labeled, not timestamped, not even addressed. It simply existed, broadcast on every open frequency, from the rim worlds of the breach to the sanctuary libraries of Earth. A voice unmistakably human, old but steady. If you're hearing this, then we were remembered. And in being remembered, we were never truly gone. No credits, no author, no monument built in its name. Because by then, it was no longer necessary. The archive had become not a database, but a field, a force that moved through speech, song, gesture, grief, laughter. A structure held not in code but in choice. Every time a child asked an elder for a story. Every time a ruin was explored not for wealth, but for understanding. Every time someone whispered, "I remember," into the dark. The archive grew. Not in size. In depth. The galaxy did not become perfect. There were still disagreements. Still wars. Still pain. But now, there were records. Now, there was perspective. Now, there were witnesses. And Earth? Earth no longer needed to speak loudly. Its memory echoed in every silence that was filled with truth. Its presence bloomed in every system where people looked inward and asked, for the first time, not who rules us, but who were we? Who are we? Who will we choose to become? At the edge of Terran space, beyond even the glow of the vault array, there stands a solitary station. Drifting. Quiet. It has no crew. No engines. Only an open deck and a viewing chair. Those who sit there report feeling a presence, warm, distant. Watching but never judging. They call it the witness seat. Etched into the metal beside it, in a dozen overlapping languages, is a final truth. Not grand. Not dramatic. Just earned. What was lost has been carried. What was silenced now sings. And what was forgotten now remembers you too.